Welcome to Start with the Dark, a podcast by Witch, a space where ancient storytelling meets modern magic, where witches join forces, weaving wisdom through threads and illuminating the unseen. Welcome back to Witch, the podcast exploring the magic within. I'm your host, and on today's episode of our first ever season of Start with the Dark, we'll tell the tales of some of Ireland's best known witches. And as 3 is the magic number, we'll focus on 3 stories of our beautiful island's wise women, healers, and all-around mystical legends. To start, we have Kilkenny's Dame Alice Kytler and her maid Petronilla de Meath, the first people on the British Isles, now Ireland of course, to be accused of witchcraft and sentenced to death by burning. Next, and finishing up with, we'll have Biddy Early, the healer of Éire, who we very briefly touched upon on our pilot episode for her righteous anger through cursing bad people. Now, apologies if you can hear some of the Dublin seagulls in the background, but they are a very important part of my city, so I'll leave them in. As always on Witch, here's a quick disclaimer to set the scene for today and beyond on this podcast. Unless stated otherwise, Witch and hosts of this podcast are not claiming to be an expert on any of the topics we discuss on the show, but rather, Witch is sharing musings from truth seekers on a lifelong journey and on a mission to bring magic to many. Witch is and always will be witches in training. Voices constantly learning, unlearning, and gathering wisdom from mistakes we make along the way. Witch is sharing personal experiences, the lessons gifted to us by spiritual mentors, and learnings we've learned from teachings we've encountered along this magical path that is life. Witch is students of the unseen, exploring and musing on our learnings. If you need professional medical help, please seek it. So, with that in mind, and when listening to Witch, pretty please, take what resonates with you, maybe pack it away in your little spell box, and leave behind what doesn't, preferably in an imaginary bubbling cauldron. Well, witches, are you ready to listen to tales of oppression to help you reclaim your witch title? Well, that's absolutely stunning news. Park that broomstick, pop the kettle on for your cup of witch's brew, and unclench your pretty little jaw as we kick off The Witches of Éire. Now, as most of our Irish and witchy listeners will know, the burning times were the hundreds of years of oppression, persecution, and execution of mostly women around the world didn't really affect Ireland as it did with other countries. And that's mostly because of our ancient pagan roots. The Irish believed in magic. We believed in healers. And most importantly, we believed in the power of the divine feminine, both light and dark. Ireland's pre-Christian society practiced a polytheistic religion. Our spiritual practices saw devotions for various deities and rituals, specifically centered around nature. Think river and earth gods and goddesses, as well as the different cycles of life, birth, death, and rebirth. To put Ireland's forgiveness or acceptance of witches into facts and figures, let us quickly take you to the city of Edinburgh. And yes, we know this isn't Ireland witches, but hang tight, we've got a reason. Did you know that Scotland murdered 5 times more accused witches than any other European country? For an old friend's birthday, shout out to the witchy legend that is Jennifer Kypel, we went on a trip to Edinburgh, and we gifted ourselves a walking tour of Edinburgh's witches. It's a must-do for all fans of the mysticals when visiting this beautifully haunting Scottish city. Now, near the end of this brilliantly informative tour, the witchy guide, who, by the way, is donned in a witch's hat and carrying a fabulous broomstick, makes a stop at the Witch's Well. Designed by John Duncan in 1894 as part of the Celtic Revival, the mystical memorial is made out of cast iron and located at the foot of Edinburgh Castle to commemorate these executions. It features witches' healing hands as well as 2 evil eyes, and many visitors leave little gifts and mementos in devotion to the near 300 people who were killed at Edinburgh Castle's esplanade during the 15 and 1600s. And we're pretty sure that you're nowhere near surprised to hear that most of these people murdered were women. On the tour, we heard that the Witchcraft Act of 1563 ensured that confessions were routinely obtained by torture. And across Scotland as an entire country versus just the city of Edinburgh, Around 2,500 of those accused were convicted and executed, normally by way of strangulation and then burning at the stake. Pretty grisly, right? Now, taking you back to Edinburgh, specifically, some of those accused were thrown into the moat below. Didn't mean to giggle there, but dark humour and all that. And if they drowned, they were innocent. If they floated, they were witches and murdered in another way, following their survival of the first execution attempt. Essentially, if you were convicted, either way, you're pretty goosed. Now, obviously, to us, we know that these souls were completely innocent, but those in charge at the time chose to use their power to control, spread fear, and essentially divide and conquer communities by accusations of witchcraft and encouraging them to accuse each other. You might be wondering why we mentioned Scotland's witches, focusing on Edinburgh's memorial, before we dove into today's episode about Irish witches. Well, the reason is because thousands of witches were sent to trial in Scotland, but in Ireland, only 4 witches were ever executed, that we know of anyway, for their accusations of witchcraft. And we think this stat is so important because it shows the acceptance of Irish witches across the country. And it also reflects the fact that Ireland was not afraid of the divine feminine, that we weren't worried about the powers of the mystical, and that we knew that women were healers as well as wise people. That's enough about Scotland. This episode is all about Ireland's witches, so let's take us back to the main part of today's podcast. First up, we've got Dame Alice Kytler and her maid Petronilla de Meath. County Kilkenny, home to the Kilkenny Cats, Kilkenny Castle, and funnily enough, the last city my wonderful granddad lived in. He lived above a bank of all places, before he moved to Dublin and fell in love with my darling granny. Now, Kilkenny City is steeped in history, magic, and now features plenty of parties for those who know. Kilkenny is a special place on the Emerald Isle, both past and present. It features many winding medieval stone alleys, proud locals, and it's nestled along the River Nore. Everything, and yet at the same time not much at all, has changed in the city since the day of November the 3rd, 1324. Now let's keep in mind that this is long before the infamous witch trials of the 15 and 1600s that ravaged through Europe, including Scotland. At this time, Dame Alice Kytler was a local successful entrepreneur, tradesperson, wife, mother, and now thrice widowed woman. Stands accused of witchcraft and set to be sent to trial for her crime. Dame Alice is an infamous local merchant. She employs many and is known for her business acumen. At the same time, she stands accused of witchcraft. Her considerable estate is also owed no less than £500 by the King of England himself. Yep, you heard that right. So wealthy and successful was the dame that the British Isles monarch was in debt to her business empire. Now, back in the day, or specifically in 1324, what is now known as the Republic of Ireland was of course part of the British Empire. 800 years of oppression, or 900 years if we count Northern Ireland, but we won't get into our personal hopes of a 32-county island today. Dame Alice was a trailblazer in her own right, but had her accusation of witchcraft not been written and recorded into history, we would likely have no evidence at all of her to discuss today. Her story, like so many other powerful, important, and interesting women over time, would have also been written out of the record books. Mad how that worked out, eh? As we said at the time, Dame Alice stood accused of witchcraft. She was on her 4th husband then. And irked by the fact that her eldest son William inherited their father's estate from Alice's malevolent manipulation before his death, so they said, her stepchildren told the local bishop that she was an evil hag responsible for witchcraft, sorcery, and murder. They claimed that her current husband was so emaciated that he was falling apart. His fingernails were disintegrating and his soul was slowly leaving his body day by day, all because of Alice's mystical evil powers. And all too enthralled at the opportunity to find and catch a witch in real life, Bishop Richard Ledren took his thirst of blood straight back to his old training grounds of London. Embellishing the tales of Alice's evil ways, the bishop claimed that she had amassed her wealth and power from a demonic lover called Robin, son of Art. She was leading a coven of witches, and she was even sacrificing many cockerels at Kilkenny's crossroads to achieve her wicked desires. A pretty spooky story, right? But if we step back and scratch at the surface level of Alice's tale, it's clear that it's one of oppression, control, and punishment by power for a woman who dared to be successful in life. And as Alice was so successful, she had many allies who were willing to help. Before the bishop had the chance to condemn her in court, she escaped. Some say to England and others say even further, but we'll never know for sure. However, what we do know is that upon her departure from Kilkenny, the dame's property, assets and wealth were seized by the church. Her beyond impressive estate was absorbed by both church and crown in the blink of an eye. But, unsatisfied with material gain alone, the truly evil bishop now focused his attention on someone much more vulnerable than the dame, her poor maid Petronilla de Meath. Poor Petronilla was primed and positioned to take centre stage of the witch hunt. She was the perfect victim to quench the bishop's blood thirst. And sadly, we don't know much more about Petronilla other than the fact that she was a mother. She was a maid. And she was most definitely an innocent woman living in a heretic time. Tortured to confession by the bishop, which, bear in mind, was not a usual practice in Ireland, and one he brought with him from London, Petronilla was ultimately, after her horrific torture, sentenced to an unbelievably cruel ending to her life, to be burnt at the stake in place of her old boss Dame Alice. As well as losing her bread and butter from her old employer, Petronilla was now doomed to lose her life as well. Sadly, we don't have exact records to show what the next chain of events were in the life of poor Petronilla. But what we do have is this note in our record books for November the 3rd, 1324. It says, "On this day, a certain woman was consigned to the flames and burned." And that's all we have of Petronilla. A harrowing tale to say the least. If you're ever in Kilkenny, make sure to stop by Kytler's pub to remember both Dame Alice and Petronilla de Meath. These two innocent women were persecuted in their own ways and executed by powerful men again in their own ways in charge of their land. There's a little plaque outside the street, and we just hope that you'll tell their stories so that they can be remembered even more. Now, moving on to the infamous healer of County Clare, Biddy Early. Those of us who have heard of Biddy will have also heard of her infamous healing blue potion bottle. She took this powerful magical tool absolutely everywhere she went, even her deathbed. Then and now, Biddy is known as a banfassa, or a wise woman in English. She was also a traditional Irish herbalist, well known as helping others in her community, and with her potent personality always front and centre of all she did. Born in 1798, and for those of you who know, that's also the year of one of our Irish rebellions, Biddy was initially named by her parents as Bridget Ellen Connors. She was the daughter of a poor local farmer called John Thomas Connors and the daughter of her mother, Ellen Early. Later on in life, she took her mother's name of Early on, which we think is pretty badass. And as a child, Biddy was well and truly, as a lot in Ireland will say, away with the fairies. Donned in her mother's handmade flax attire, Biddy would spend most of her time speaking to the fairies as Gaeilge. She did know some English, but her mother tongue was essentially Gaeilge. As with most other non-wealthy people over time, Biddy's mother could not read or write. But what she could do, she did magically and powerfully. Ellen was an exceptional herbalist. She held close to her chest many familial healing herbal remedies that were kept as secrets to their clan. Say that 5 times quickly. And passing on what she could to her daughter Biddy, Ellen taught her how to create these proven potion recipes for herself. Very sadly, but as with many others of their time, Ellen died of malnutrition when Biddy was only 16 years old. And Biddy's father followed her to the grave just 6 months later, this time from typhus. Now left as head of the family household, but with no means to pay her rent, Biddy was faced with no option aside from leaving her family home, which we're sure was an extremely daunting predicament for a young girl left with no parents to guide her through life's challenges. But Ellen's wise healing legacy well and truly lived on through her powerfully authentic daughter. After moving to Limerick, living in poor houses, and eventually meeting a husband twice her age at a local market, Biddy gave birth to her only son, a child named Paddy. From then, Biddy gained notoriety from creating and providing the local community with cures from her new family's 3-room cottage back in her birth county of Clare, this time in a village called Fecal. Biddy refused money for her proven potions, instead allowing recipients to pay her with whiskey and poaching. Widowed by age 25, Biddy then married her stepson John Malley, and in the early stages of this marriage she shot to fame around the island of Ireland. But, irked by the many visitors that she saw both day and night, her new husband was not impressed by his previous stepmother's attention. And sadly, Biddy's son Paddy was also said to have felt the pain of his mother's popularity, eventually leaving his home one day and never returning again. Biddy, like most who survived these difficult times to stay alive in, married twice more after being widowed again by 42. Her third marriage was to a younger labourer called Tom, who she outlived until she was 70, and they lived in a cottage together overlooking a lake called Biddy's Lake. Last up, Biddy's fourth and final nuptials were to a much younger man called Thomas, who she married in exchange for a cure at the ripe old age of 70. And just 1 year later, he died from alcohol poisoning, too fond of the drink he was. Now, taking us back to Biddy's mystical natural healing powers and potions, and specifically her magical blue potion bottle, which, as we know, she consulted for healing advice alongside using her divine feminine powers of intuition to understand what people needed to be healed. If doctors or priests couldn't help, or if people simply couldn't even afford a doctor, Biddy Early was called upon for her uniquely creative healing methods. Biddy healed animals, ensuring the farms they worked on provided food and sustenance for the poor and vulnerable families surviving from them. And although she stood up to the mistreatment of the poor, vulnerable, and her family and friends, in 1865 Biddy was accused and ultimately acquitted of witchcraft due to the lack of evidence against her. Now again, this was under the Witchcraft Act of 1586. As Biddy was brought to Ennis's court, those who initially were happy to testify against her ultimately backed out. Biddy had many local supporters and fans. They were those who she'd helped and healed over her many years of being a banfassa. Biddy's famous for both her healing potions and her curses, but she only ever cursed those who deserved it. She sought to balance the scales of moral justice in each and every action she took. Powerful and justice-led, Biddy went against the Protestant landlords who sought to evict the poor in her local community. She made a name for herself as both a healer and a lady justice. Biddy was a true badass witch you wouldn't want to mess with. But sadly, after helping thousands of others in exchange for non-monetary goods, Biddy died of poverty. Her death was reported in the Irish American Weekly as having occurred on the 1st of June 1872. And according to Wikipedia, one biographer is quoted as saying, "In many ways, what Biddy is purported to have done is what an oppressed peasantry would themselves wish to have done if they had dared, because she was independent and refused to be browbeaten by the priests and landlords' authoritarian ways." Now, let that sink in for a minute. The happy end to this tale is that she was surrounded by the love of her dear friend and neighbour Pat, who worked with the local priest to ensure her burial in the local Fecal cemetery. Her legacy lives on to show that Biddy was independent, powerful, and that she refused to bow to the rules of systematic oppression. Biddy was a true diva, she was an icon, and she was a legend until the very end. To honour Biddy's legacy, it's important that we continue telling her tale, whether that's to each other, friends, family, or even on social media. As we take you to the close of today's episode, we want to remind listeners to gently explore their own witch wounds as you start to explore them. Be aware of times when you may be experiencing oppression or repression yourselves. And that's usually simply for expressing your own divine femininity or intuition. But you can reclaim any lost power by both recognizing and accepting when this is at play, by responding and not reacting, and by spreading kindness, not niceness, in all you do. Do you want to hear more stories of magical witches, both past and present? Well, that's absolutely stunning news. Keep listening to Witch, we've got plenty more in store. And if you want to hear a specific story on a future episode of Witch, we'd absolutely love to hear from you. Message us by visiting www.witch.world, follow us on Instagram at weare_witch, or find us on TikTok at Reclaim the Witch. And we're very excited to say that on the next episode of Start with the Dark by Witch, we'll hear from tarot reader and astrologist Coley McManus on healing your shadow through your birth chart. She's our first ever guest host, and we can't wait for you to hear from her. See you next time, folks. Grab your broomsticks, let's reclaim your witch title, and let's embark on a mission to bring magic to many.